It all started with a damn single hair. My wife is on the shorter side. I can see over her head even if she stands on her toes. We were cooking when she tried to squeeze by. By chance, I looked down at the top of her head. At first, I didn't see it. It was hardly noticeable. A single short white hair was mixed inside the rest of the dark strands. I reached out to brush some hair away to get a better look. She flinched away from my hand, but laughed at the movement. "You're going gray," I commented, smiling, hoping I didn't offend her. She wasn't even 30 yet, but I've seen people whose hair that turned before her. "Good, I look super hot," she laughed again. She let me look at the small white spot. It was short with a slight bend, and thicker than a normal hair. I reached over to take it between two fingers, ready to pull it out. She elbowed my chest, getting away with her first gray hair intact. "Let it grow longer. I like it." I raised my hands, showing a truce. If she wanted to let it grow, I didn't care either way. It was just hair. We got busy cooking dinner, and I forgot about it for a few days. That was until Carrie fainted at work. The call came while I was in the office. It was an hour before I got the message. I quickly told my boss I needed to leave for the day. I rushed to the hospital with dread forming in my stomach. I met her in the waiting room. She looked pale, but overall not as bad as I feared. Her co-worker drove her there, which was nice of them. Soon, we were able to see a doctor for a checkup. They didn't see anything wrong with the basic checkup and tests. A scan had been suggested, but it would take a while before Carrie could get a more thorough look. We were sent home without any answers. I tucked her into bed to let her rest for the rest of the day. Thankfully, Carrie didn't feel lightheaded when we got back home, only overtired. I thought getting extra sleep would fix that. The next day, it appeared the rest cured whatever caused the sudden fainting spell. Carrie acted like her old self and went back to work even though she could have taken another day off. I told her not to push herself. If she started feeling off again, she should stop working and get someone to help. She assured me she felt fine and nothing bad would happen. I believed that for a while. The medical tests wouldn't be for a few weeks. I kept an eye out for more gray hairs at the roots. However, none showed. However, I noticed something else. Carrie started to act differently. The signs were small. She would pause for an extra few seconds, trying to think of the next word she wanted to say. I figured she was just having issues sleeping. The concern came when her eating habits changed. Carrie had always been a picky eater. That was fine. We worked around that. One night, I came home to see the food I had bought for myself gone. I wasn't upset, just confused. It wasn't like her to devour frozen meals, and yet she had doubled what she ate without gaining weight. Instead, it looked like she had been losing some. I brought it up to her, and she just brushed it off, commenting she always ate more when the weather got colder. We had been married for 5 years. How did I never notice that before? Then her memory issues got worse. Small items like keys and her wallet were always getting misplaced. I was very understanding and helped her find what she lost every time. After we located what she had misplaced, she told me that maybe stress from work was getting to her. I believed that the first 3 times. I started to look online to see if there was anything I could find that explained these little changes. A month after it all started, she did something she never had before. She snapped at me. We were in the kitchen dishing out a special takeout meal when I caressed the top of her head. I leaned down to kiss the top of hers when she spun around, face red with rage. She pushed as hard as she could, with both hands knocking me hard into the table. It didn't hurt that much. I was just more shocked than anything. "Don't fucking touch me without any warning," she shouted and stomped a foot. My mouth hung open. Carrie never swore. Well, rarely. She would drop a curse whenever it was funny, but I had never heard her swear in rage at anyone, let alone imagine she would do so at me. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked, mouth open. What had I done wrong? Did I cause this, or did something else happen that made her act this way? My head swam with thousands of questions. Carrie quickly settled down, embarrassed by the outburst. She walked over and offered an apology hug that I took. "I'm fine. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just don't feel like myself for some reason," she said in a small voice. I risked a heavy question that changed the mood. "Do you think you might be pregnant? We've been trying for a while, and hormones can make you act different," I suggested. She scrunched up her face at the suggestion as a joke. "Different? As in crazy?" she half joked. Well, I trailed off, and my answer made her smile again. Sadly, she pulled away and shook her head. "No, I've already checked." I didn't let the disappointment show on my face. We hadn't had the money for the tests to see why we hadn't been able to have a child yet. We figured one would come at the right time. That time simply hadn't come yet. "We'll call the doctors to see if you can get in for those scans sooner. You might have hit your head harder than we thought when you fainted at work. It's not as if you made changes to your medications or anything like that," I suggested. There hadn't been a bruise when she fainted, but I didn't want to take the risk. An odd expression came over her face as she chewed on the inside of her lip. Carrie had something she wanted to tell me, but was too embarrassed to do so. It took a few minutes and some joking threats of eating her dinner for her to open up. I took some of these Asian pills I bought from the gas station. They're supposed to help with a lot of things, like those weird energy drinks you can find. I frowned concerned over this new information. "Do you have the box still? We can look up to see if anyone else had the same issues." She shook her head and sighed. "No, it was like 2 months ago, if not longer. I took 3 and then tossed them out because they made me feel lightheaded. I don't know what they were called, but the gas station stopped selling them." Well, that sucked. She didn't remember enough to track down these mystery pills. At least we had something to bring up when we saw the doctors next, or so I assumed. I held her tight, assuring her everything was all right. Figuring out why she felt so odd lately wouldn't be a big deal, that it would just take time. I was unaware time is what we lacked. A few days later, Carrie skipped work and stayed in bed. I offered to stay home, but she talked me into going to work. However, I left my shift early to find her in the same spot I had left her. Dark bags were under her eyes, even though she rested all day. I got her dinner and begged Carrie to go to the hospital. Somehow, she talked me down and promised to go in the morning if she still felt tired. The meal woke her up a little. I climbed into bed next to her, and we watched a bit of TV before both falling asleep. That night, I woke up in the dark to hear her moving in her sleep. I turned on the bedside light, and she flinched away from it. Her hands went over her eyes as if the brightness hurt. Do you have a headache? Can I get you something? I offered. Migraine, yes, please. It feels like pressure. Her voice was low and weak. I got up and put my cell phone in my pajama pants pocket. Depending on the next few minutes, I would call for an ambulance. I got her a glass of water and some aspirin I helped her take. Her body felt far too thin. How had she lost so much weight without anyone noticing? While keeping her upright with a hand on her back, I spotted the little white hair growing out of the top of her head. I had forgotten about it. An urge to pluck it came over me. While Carrie remained defenseless, I took the hair between a finger and my thumb, then pulled. Her body jolted. Instead of normal hair, it appeared like I had started to pull out a thread that started to get thicker. Her scalp bulged a little from what was under the skin, making my stomach churn. Unable to help myself, I kept pulling. Slowly but surely, the long white thread came out, growing thicker and thicker as more came into view. Her body twitched and her eyes rolled back. I knew this was hurting her, and yet I couldn't stop. Wrapping the exposed thread around my hand a few times, I took a good hold of it with the other and pulled as hard as I could. White liquid pooled out from around the wound. I heard a soft pop as the end of the white wriggling mass came loose. It moved on its own, the end as thick as my finger. I could have sworn I heard it scream in the dim light of the room. Carrie had stopped moving, her body limp, but somehow a dazed smile was on her face. Oh, that's better. Her words were slurred, and her eyes slowly started to shut. Disgusted by what I saw, I tossed the thing away as quickly as I was able. My hands flew to her shoulders, trying to shake her awake. I didn't understand what happened or what I just did. The wriggling long white creature I just pulled from her head started to inch closer to my bare feet. I nearly threw up, my skin crawling at the sight. I might have been able to handle myself if what happened stopped there. Quickly, my deepest fears came to light as more small white hairs pushed through Carrie's dark strands, moving on their own looking for a new host. Just one of these things was enough to nearly make me lose it. Seeing so many caused my brain to shut down. I hate myself for what I did next. I turned on my heels, fleeing the house, leaving my wife behind. I know I called 911, but had no memory of what I said. Police and an ambulance showed up. A lot of questions I did not have answers for were asked. I sat in the back of a police car, letting people speak to me, but not hearing a word. At some point, another car pulled up. A black one with a very plainly dressed man got out. He took some officers aside and spoke with them. Had someone called a lawyer for me? Did I need one? I didn't care enough to ask. The officers came back and asked if I could speak with them at the station. I numbly agreed, but asked about Carrie. They said nothing and just ushered me away. I spent the night at the station going over what I had seen in detail with someone who didn't bother to write anything down. In the morning, I was free to go, but not a soul had told me about Carrie. When I asked, the officer gave me a strained look and asked who that might be. I felt like I was going crazy. I demanded information about my wife and caused so much trouble they almost locked me up. A bomb was dropped on my world. They claimed I was never married, and I arrived that night because of a random arson attack on my home. These officers were bad actors. I knew they were lying, but they refused to drop the new story. I called in a favor, and a co-worker drove me to my place. The street was swarmed with firefighters, finishing putting out a blaze. I stared in sheer shock, realizing they kept me at the station all night so they could cover all of this up. Who was they? I don't have the slightest clue. No matter who I spoke to, those people had reached them first. In stressed tones, they claimed to not know who Carrie was. This couldn't be happening. I didn't understand how things went wrong so fast. I called and called, praying anyone picked up the phone that knew her. Soon, my calls and any attempts at contacting her family were blocked except by one person. Her mother answered the phone. At first, she didn't speak, and I didn't think anyone was on the other end of the line. Was someone else there with her? Or did she just not want to speak with me? Please, stop trying to contact us. We don't know who you're talking about, she said in a low, strained voice. I still have photos of her on my phone, photos of us together. Please, tell me what's going on, I begged. She was also a victim here. I didn't want to get angry at her. I just wanted answers. AI is getting good nowadays, she said, but didn't sound sure of her statement. Please, I loved her as much as you did. At first, I thought the line went dead. But after a full minute, she responded, whispering so low, I barely heard her. I did love her so much, but I need to think of my family. I lost a daughter. I refused to let them take anyone else. She swiftly hung up the phone and then blocked my number. I knew I would never hear from her again, no matter how hard I tried. If I did press the matter, I endangered everyone Carrie ever cared about. Right now, I'm staying in a hotel using the last of my savings. My family has offered to take me in, to get help, to try and live a normal life. I considered taking them up on the offer. The only thing stopping me is a constant itch at the top of my head, growing more intense by the hour.